don't fall. That's when you know you're gonna go dry. When the rain don't fall, that's when you know you're gonna go dry. And it won't do no good to be crying out loud, babe, or cursing the sky. When the field turns brown, you know famine coming on.
Welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Rana. Happy spring. Today is the equinox, and it's hard to tell. I think we're getting snow again tomorrow, but better, longer days are coming. Tonight, my guest is Erick Carrio, and we're just going to talk about a few different issues that are impacting New London and the state and the nation. In kind of an informal way. So welcome, Erick. I'm glad you could come on tonight.
Thank you, Rana.
And I guess, at this point you need no introduction on the show, but we did talk a little bit ahead of time about just some current things happening that we wanted to talk about. And one thing I wanted to talk about, because towards the end of last year we had a lot of nonprofit organizations coming onto the show and talking about work that was done and how people could support them. And one organization we did not bring onto the show, we didn't have a chance to, was Alliance for Living. And I thought that you are someone who could tell us about the mission of the organization and what services it provides and how people can support it.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Happy spring, like Rana said. Also, it's look more like winter out there than anything else. Makes me miss Puerto Rico.
I bet it does.
So,
Makes me miss it, and I've never been there.
I'm Erick Carrio, like some of you know. I'm the early intervention specialist at Alliance for Living. So right now, what I do there is I reach out to a lot of community organizations to do testing events. We host testing events around New London County and serve HIV positive individuals in New London County area and help improve their life. We do case management. We do have an ELP, like a food pantry program, to help our clients. And we're out there in the community doing outreach, helping people, and fighting against a lot of stigma that's out there in the community too. Because a lot of people don't know what HIV stands for even. A lot of people think that if I get it, I'm gonna die, when in reality, now more than ever, we have so many advances in medicine that people take their pill every day, get undetectable, and undetectable equals untransmittable, which means that they cannot transmit the virus. Some other advances around the HIV field are PEP and PrEP. PEP stands for post-exposure prophylaxis, which means that you have if you think you engage with someone that might be HIV positive, you can go to the emergency room or a clinic within 72-hour period, and you can get prescribed medicine that will prevent you to acquire the virus. The PrEP one, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis, is a pill that you take every day and protects you against HIV.
And I'm guessing one day that might morph into just having that added to people's immunization schedule, the way so many diseases are.
So some of the research presented in Carrio, which is a big conference related to the advances in medications, they actually are coming up with a kind of a medication implant, kind of the same one that the women get for birth control, but it's going to be for PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis. So instead of taking a pill every day, you will get like that injectable every 3 months. But that's not coming out in the market. It's still in research process.
Well, I hadn't really given this any thought at all, but there are other bloodborne pathogens that there are immunizations against, and we don't really think twice about it. When I worked for Head Start, I always made sure I was up to date on my hepatitis B immunization, because I was working with families for confidentiality reasons. They did not have to tell me if they were hepatitis B positive. And, working with 2-year-olds or 3-year-olds, sometimes, it's hard not to get exposed to body fluids. We were changing diapers. Kids had colds. They might have, open sore, get scrapes and bleed. And so it's good to know that there's been enough research in HIV that it's becoming a preventable disease.
It is, and there's a lot of activity going around the United States in general to educate people about it. But not only HIV, other STDs, which a lot of people don't know about. I can say, for example,
Sure.
like our youth, the youth that I have engaged personally. In my youth work with Hearing Your Voices, Fresh in London, when you talk to them, my sisters, my cousins, which are teenagers, when you talk to them about sexually transmitted disease or STI, sexually transmitted infections, they don't necessarily know what they are, and they don't necessarily know how to protect themselves. And they are on that age that they are exploring, that they're learning. But some of our schools just teach STDs and STIs like a chapter in the health class. They don't go deep inside the topics and educate them like, this is how you protect yourself. These are the causes. This is what causes this. This is how you can protect against it. But that's not happening. So a lot of my outside of work, like kind of like work to like educating people. My family, for example, my Puerto Rican grandmother, she had a lot of like knowledge, and that provided like a lot of stigma about the work that I do. And I kind of like, no, like it's not like that. Like this is what I do. This is how we do it, and kind of educated her into knowing more. And she knows to educate others. So I think like education is key to fight the virus and fight a lot of STIs and STDs are out there.
And I think, as you were talking, I was thinking as part of the bigger discussion on what kind of sexuality education we provide in our schools, because I think there is still resistance in some places to giving students a very comprehensive education related to sexuality.
Yeah, and a lot of people, when you talk to them about bringing that kind of topics into our school, will say like, oh, that's for the parent to do. But when I talk to the youth, they say, my parent hasn't talked to me about it. No one in my family has stopped me. And I'm like, well, how do you know, what do you know about this, and how have you learned it? Oh, my friends in the street, my older brother, they told me this and they told me that, and sometimes they're right, but most of the times they're wrong. And so I'm like, yes, you can you can get this, but like, how are you gonna protect yourself against it? Like, and now in an age where everything is moving, in times where everything is moving fast, I think the more we learn, the more powerful we are about our health, the more empowered we are about taking care of each other. And also on the medical field, there's a lot of like not talking about PEP or PrEP. Like a lot of physicians don't know about the medications, and sometimes in online forums that I am, not necessarily locally, but internationally in some online forums, you can see people like, my primary care didn't wanted me to take this medication because he think that I'm gonna get involved in more risky behavior. And I think it's important for everybody to get educated about what are the options out there.
And the whole idea of some things being more stigmatized than others it's something that when I think about like drug policy too, because of course, HIV transmission also can come through, injecting drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just odd to me how some things are stigmas and some things aren't.
Mm-hmm.
Many people who have diabetes, it is related to a bad diet that they have chosen. Not everyone, but some who get it later in life. And yet we don't stigmatize them and say we won't give you insulin or diabetes education because you might engage in riskier eating behavior.
Yeah. That's true. You have that's the point there. Like, why not talk about it if we can prevent it? So that's the kind of work I do. We actually have another syringe exchange program. Now that you talk about injection drugs, every Friday, 12 to 3, we have a syringe exchange program where people can bring from the community, no questions asked, completely anonymous. They can bring their used syringe and get new ones in order to prevent the sharing of needles, and that person can get positive. So
now, when was it? In the early 1980s, the AIDS,
the epidemic.
Started or became known. In that time, I guess over the last 10 years, when there's been so much more medical advances, so much more research, and although there's still stigma, it isn't the level that it was 20 years ago, I don't think. Are we seeing increasing rates of infection or decreasing rates of infection? What are the trends in terms of dealing with this disease?
At least in Connecticut, the statistics are, for the last statistics, I think, I'm not an expert on numbers, but the statistics show that there were, it's less infections, but also, in my own perspective, I think a lot of people are not getting tested. A lot of people think that they go to the primary care and they get blood work done, and that the HIV test is included there, and most of the times it's not. A lot of the times, the HIV pathogen, it's not being done through blood work. So I encourage a lot of people to get, at least annually, they should get tested for HIV and other STDs too. I think it's important to test for everything.
And especially now, I mean, everything is treatable, even if it's not always curable. So in terms of quality of life, it's better to know than not know what you might be exposed to
Definitely.
or harboring. So so for Alliance for Living, now you do outreach, right?
I do early intervention services, yes.
So what does that entail?
That entails that if someone tests positive in a clinic, they will get referred for a case manager through me.
Now, how are people usually or often in like a state of shock when they first meet you, or?
We have been doing testing for about 3 months now, and we haven't found anybody positive. But in other clinicians that they have, they stated that they have found positive. Like the reactions vary per person.
Yeah, I can imagine that some people it might be quite shocking. And
But you know, like I tell everybody, like HIV is not the same virus that it was back in the 80s. There's so many advances that someone that's taking their medication every day can live a normal, healthy life.
Now, I looked on the website for Alliance for Living, and they talk about like nutrition therapy, and so how does good nutrition impact HIV, and what does Alliance for Living do to help?
That's not my area of expertise, Rana.
Okay.
We do have an MNT services, which is a medical nutrition therapist, and she helps people. It depends, most of the time it depends on specific clients. Some people want to gain weight, some people want to lose weight, I'm not sure, but actually that's a good question that I will ask on my next training. I have been working on the field for 6 months now. Too. So before this, I did a lot of youth work. I was working at Fresh. I was working at Hearing Your Voices. So I don't have that aspect of now. But like right now, I'm like learning a lot of it. But that's a good question. I will follow up in another show with that.
Yeah, I would be interested in that, because I'm guessing that part of the problem with the illness is that you might get co-infections.
Yes, opportunistic infections, which is when usually when a person is not taking their medication. You can get pneumonia or other infections that can turn the virus into AIDS. So you can AIDS stands for acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, and that's what happens when a person is not taking good care of themselves. They get an opportunistic infection, and they will end up in the emergency room.
So if someone wants to help and support Alliance for Living, what kind of help can the organization get?
Sure. So there's a volunteer sign up in our website that people can ask for volunteering opportunities, and also someone can donate money if they wish to Alliance for Living to improve our programming and services. And other things that people can do is just learn and educate themselves and share the knowledge that they learn about HIV and other STDs around the community. Also, if someone is interested in getting tested, the next 2 Saturdays we're going to be at Community Health Center. We have a collaboration with them. From 9 to 3 p.m. you can get HIV tested and also tested for hepatitis C. And there's also a forum on PrEP, talking about pre-exposure prophylaxis.
Now, the testing you conduct regularly then, right?
Yes, every Wednesday in our agency we have from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Free HIV testing, and it takes completely confidential. It only takes 20 minutes to get a result. And we can also, with the collaboration that we have with CHC, the Community Health Center, we can actually refer for a PrEP appointment with their facilities.
Now, let's see, there was one other thing. I was going to talk a little bit about housing. Do you do housing support? Because it seems to me that the way our economy is in New London and in Connecticut and maybe in the United States in general, that people who have health care needs, who may or may not have health insurance, they're actually a risk of homelessness.
Yeah.
Do you confront that?
We do have a scattered housing program, but that's through different funding. But I cannot actually talk about that program here.
Okay, I was just wondering.
But we do have a housing program.
And so people really can just go to Alliance for Living and tap into any of the comprehensive programs that they work on directly or collaborate with.
Only if they're clients of ours can get services.
So how do you become a client?
Well,
Get it?
Yeah, by getting referred to a physician to one of our facilities. And usually it's also through a lot of funding and income. So there's a lot of guidelines that we have to follow regarding to it. But talking about income and a lot of the stuff, it's like really important to know that a lot of facilities and fundings are at risk now with the new healthcare reform and a lot of the issues that are going through the Capitol, So it's important to stay aware of what's going on in our political system in order to comprehend how that impacts our funding generally.
It's really mind-boggling to me how our irregular system of healthcare just can impact people's lives on so many different levels, and not just related directly to disease prevention and treatment, but whether they can afford to have a roof over their heads.
I mean, if we're talking about HIV and homelessness and all those issues and funding, we can talk about HIV related in Puerto Rico after the hurricane. A lot of people were without their medication. A lot of people lost their homes. And I personally have a lot of networks around HIV that work within HIV/AIDS field in Puerto Rico. And when I talk to them, they told me it's hard. Our office got flooded, and we're all working on the same floor, but we're doing our work. And they were contacting pharmaceuticals to get medication because a lot of the clients lost it with the rain, lost their home, fires. So a lot of complications, and they were able to contact a lot of pharmaceuticals to get medications to provide to their clients. But they're still struggling. And connected to the political system, then the first funding that Puerto Rico ever received for research on HIV and AIDS in the island, there were a couple of $1 million that were completely disappeared from a budget back in the 90s with one of our governors. So and now if funding is cut here, funding is cut there, and actually one of the centers, volunteer LGBTQ centers in Puerto Rico that I used to volunteer, they also it was an LGBTQ center, but it also was a testing facility to test young folks, and they lost their they lost their funding because they were not. They was not able to provide to afford the rent, the employees, and the services that we're doing at the same time. So when I asked the person that run the testing center, how are you getting people tested now? Oh, people have to travel all the way to this other town to get tested for free.
So we know that a lot of them are not getting tested.
Yeah. And for me, it's really difficult to comprehend how in this country a lot of people are looking to get tested, but over here in the United States, a lot of people don't just are afraid to get tested. So that's like a paradox, a paradigm right there. So have you gotten tested, Rona?
I haven't. It's really funny. I was a blood donor for many years, and although that isn't a means to get tested, they do test for HIV as well as other things. And the last 2 years, I've actually been deferred as a blood donor because the last time I had Lyme disease, I was also exposed to babesiosis, which is it's a protozoan. It's kind of related to malaria. And it's carried by the same ticks that carry Lyme disease. And it was discovered that I had antibodies. They never actually found the microbe in me, but so they won't take me to give blood anymore. So I do, do their checklist when I would take blood. And some of what they ask, I don't know if you want to talk about the Red Cross and how they, their questionnaires and their screening people, but a lot of, the question, revolve around, have you traveled, of course,
Yeah.
and have you had certain illnesses? I know they talk about, if you could have been exposed to like mad cow disease or one of those related, Jacob Creutzfeldt or things like babesiosis or whatever. But a lot of it is, they're targeting gay guys.
Yeah,
They're not allowing them.
So that happens here too. In Puerto Rico, I
does
have
happen
to lie about
here.
my sexuality when I got tested, when I donated blood in Puerto Rico, because a friend of mine needed blood, and I told him that I was straight in order for me to donate blood. Because if not, I have been tested.
Yeah.
I know I was able to donate blood, and did all the tests, and I was able to donate blood, but only because I lied.
And it's kind of, you always ask the questions and answer the questions. And some of the questions I just feel funny about. It's like, have you ever had sex with a man who had sex with a man? Or have you ever had sex with a man who ever injected drugs even once? And I guess I feel
that stuff.
Yeah, and I guess I've always felt pretty good because, Bob and I have been married for a really long time, 48 years. And like he in the next booth answering the same questions, but it's like you never know 100%, except about yourself.
Yeah.
And so it seems like the questions are a little random. So during all that time, though, they do test for the blood for HIV as well as many other things, including babesiosis. So I used to donate blood about 2 or 3 times a year. So I felt as though, there was no change in lifestyle or anything, that I felt pretty good. And now I don't know. Now that the Red Cross won't. Well, I'm kind of indefinitely deferred while they figure out.
How does it affect you, though?
It doesn't at all. Although I read later that it can be a really dangerous disease and can kill people.
Wow.
But I had never heard of it.
What is it called again?
Babesiosis.
Babesiosis.
Babesiosis, yeah. And they, and I had given blood maybe 2.5 years ago, and I got a deferral letter a few weeks later from Red Cross saying, you're deferred because we found they do 2 different tests, one for the microbe, one for the antibody, and they said they didn't find the microbe, but they found antibodies. Now, it could have been that the antibiotics I took for the Lyme disease I had also killed this other organism, and that's why I had antibodies. And they tested me for about every 6 months for about a year or 2, a year and a half. And finally, they said I tested negative for everything, no antibodies, no. They still haven't figured out whether I can donate ever again.
Interesting.
So sometimes I certainly understand. Bob had a bike accident about 15 years ago and got 6 units of blood. And of course you want to know that the blood you're getting is safe.
Oh, for sure.
But sometimes it seems like the questions that are being asked aren't exactly the same as the questions that need to be asked. Not just for that, but for other things too.
No, for sure.
This is sort of off topic, but you hear stories about people being drug tested at work, and it's like
for housing, some housing will ask for.
And
for
honestly, impairment might not correlate exactly with what's legal and what isn't legal.
Yeah. And sometimes when you analyze all these questions, it all comes into data. If you really think about it, data are numbers. Numbers are good for a lot of reasons. But sometimes it creates kind of like an algorithm. You can find out how many people in this area are living healthy or not. So that's really interesting. And nowadays with a lot of stuff, it's moving around data and internet infrastructure. It's kind of creepy when you get into that kind of research.
Yeah, it's nice to know, but sometimes I do feel like we don't have any privacy left, do we?
I hear you.
Well, you started talking about Puerto Rico and the problems in terms of dealing with HIV and AIDS since the hurricane, and it's 6 months now. And I just read there was just a demonstration in Washington, D.C. that FEMA is pulling out, and yet there are still a lot of needs there. And you grew up in Puerto Rico, and I assume you still have family there. What are you hearing?
So my mother called me, and she was around one of the neighborhoods where my aunt lives, and they're just getting power today. One of the American companies that are servicing the island just installed some electric poles in the area, and she was telling me like the whole neighborhood went out to say thank you to these people.
But 6 months later.
Yeah, 6 months later they were able to get electricity, and this is just in kind of like a rural but urban area at the same time. So imagine all the people. There's people in juntas which are more like in the center of the island, which are still struggling. I know people that live in the south of the island in Patillas, and this whole neighborhood got uncommunicated because the bridge fell, and that bridge was the only one to get into the neighborhood. So there are around 10 families that in order to get their food, they need to cross the river by food. Buy the groceries, and their cars are stuck within their neighborhood, so they need to call other people that are outside the neighborhood to pick them up and go do groceries. And that's not. I don't think that's living. A lot of my friends, specifically one of my best friend Ashley, her family lost their roof, and they just recently FEMA recently helped them through funding, and now they're installing like a more strong roof for their house, but they lost everything within the house, and they only got money just to reestablish their roof, their ceiling.
It's just amazing. And it's so hard for us to imagine. And Puerto Rico is part of the United States. The people who live there are U.S. citizens, even though, as a territory, not a state, they don't have the same kind of status. The individual people are just as much citizens as, I am, you are.
Yeah, and the food prices in a lot of the rural supermarkets are going up. According to my friends, they are reporting me like, Eric, I used to buy a tray of 6 pork chops for $6.95, and now I'm paying $12 to buy 6 pork chops at the supermarket. And that's the food industry, but also with the schools now. The one of the educational reforms that they're trying to pass is to turn all of our public schools into APPs, which are, I think you call them public and private alliances, like charter schools, basically. So they wanted to.
So it's more or less what happened in New Orleans, that they kind of used the destruction to get rid of the public school system.
Basically, that's what we're seeing in Puerto Rico happening. But not only that, related to education. One of the things that really shocked me was that currently we have a. She was born in Puerto Rico, but her family is from their whole life lived in the United States. We have our educational secretary of education in the island, and she recently got rid of our Puerto Rican week. So the Puerto Rican week is a week where our students in the schools get to celebrate the Puerto Rican culture from our 3 races: are the Spanish, the Tainos, and the African. So it's a combination of a lot of like food activities, games that our ancestors used to play, and she got rid of it and just made it one day, and it's called the U.S. Citizenship Day. So I was like, what? So they eliminated that, and they eliminated the holiday for the teachers, which was Elera, which is the Commonwealth celebration, the day that we became a Commonwealth, and turned it into the U.S. Citizenship Day, which is the day that when we got our citizenship back in 1869, if I'm not wrong. That sounds wrong. I'm not sure, but that's happening in the island right now. And when I'm over here, and I'm like, wow, like the whole place is different. My grandmother was down in the island. One of her brothers passed away, and she went down. This was about 2 weeks ago, and when she arrived last Friday, she was crying. She was like, so much devastation. You don't feel this. It doesn't feel the same. She told me it doesn't feel the same way. And I'm like, I hear you, Grandma. Like I hear you. Like I've seen it in the news, but like when she was crying, seeing her talking about Puerto Rico, like it's not the same when she grew up, and it's not the same when I grew up there. And she went to visit her old neighborhood, and she saw so much devastation. It kind of like destroyed her.
Wow. And again, we're looking at something 6 months after. You know, we had in Nor'easter, last week. We might have another one soon, and a lot of not so much in New London, but some of the surrounding towns. 3/4 of the residents or
Complaining about
more
no electricity.
lost electricity for 2 or 3 days. And it was considered a disaster. Now, granted, it isn't as cold. You're not going to have 25-degree nights down in Puerto Rico, but I just can't even imagine what it would be like to be without your electricity or with your house in poor repair for months.
Yeah.
And
Or
not
water.
just day.
Well, there's people without water too still. So we take for granted over here in the mainland. And like you said, like I saw a couple of friends complaining, oh, I don't have heat, I don't have hot water because of the storm. And I'm like over here like thinking like, yeah, but you will have it probably like in 2, 3, 4 days, maybe latest a week.
Right. And we have potable water, so we can drink.
Yeah.
And
So, like we need to think about like how we see the world and know that not everything about us as persons, but like there's a lot of people out there that are struggling. And the extreme part, I haven't gone back to the Virgin Islands, but I know a lot of devastation happened there, and it's interesting that we keep talking about Puerto Rico, but also like what is the situation right now for the Virgin Islands too, because they're part of the United States and there's U.S. citizens just as Puerto Rican. So I will have to follow up on that. But I remember when it happened, there was a lot of devastation in the Virgin Islands too, and the impact that it had not only and on the people, but like on the mental health of the children. One of the articles that the Puerto Rican newspaper put out, and how there's a whole generation that are gonna be scared of storms, and a lot of kids reporting having nightmares and not being able to sleep because they are reviving in their sleep. There's the whole storm.
well, I can imagine it would be pretty traumatic.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about kindergartners here, and like how that impacted their lives, and that includes a lot of like new closing in schools too because of the infrastructure. There's a lot of excuses that are kind of like making Puerto Rico powerless, and the government is not doing anything but encouraging more. How do I say this? That sounds nice. They're encouraging more the Americanization more than anything right now, like the current government that the island has. And a lot of condos are going up for really, really cheap prices. I hear about whole neighborhoods in the capital being bought by financial firms, realty firms, that are buying them like for really, really cheap prices. And Puerto Ricans are living the island in masses too.
Well, I was going to talk about that. Inevitably, we're going to see people leaving. And New London has been impacted as well. And I don't know the details. Maybe you know better than I how many like students maybe are in our schools who have come over the last 6 months, and families who have relocated here and what the experience is like.
Last time I heard about numbers, I think we were at 21 kids in our whole schools, and that was in December. So I had to.
Even be a little
it might be a
more.
little bit more. My sister told me. My sister was one of them. My sister moved immediately after the hurricane happened because we knew that her school wasn't gonna open until I think they already opened. They opened in December, but imagine like losing a whole semester. Based because of the hurricane and not having water, not having electricity, not having food. So she was one of the ones that moved in. She's living with my grandmother, and she told me that she made a lot of friends that move in because of that too. I saw one of my friends from college that I met in college. She moved to New London, and she's like, I like it here. It's a beautiful town, but it's too cold. And I'm like, I hear you. I'm with you. I do believe that we have a really good ESL program, and that's really important for the Puerto Rican kids that are moving in, having a strong ESL program and getting that education that they deserve, although they're not in the mainland, and I know they miss it, and I don't know if they're getting any support related to that, but there's a whole community out there that are willing to support them and They've been support. I know a lot of agencies are coordinating funds. I know TVCCA had an emergency fund. I don't know if they still have it for Puerto Rican families that recently moved to New London. I know YC had been helping people with their food pantry. The past months, I volunteer at the mobile food pantry, and there's a lot more people getting foods. It's also winter, so I know that that's gonna bump up the numbers. But you have seen more bilingual people around town. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people are moving out, and they need to find out they need to find where to live. And like you said, now FEMA is cutting the funding for most of the families that are staying in the hotels, because they're saying that your house is livable back in the island, but in reality, most of these houses are not livable. They still have no water. They still have no electricity. The roof is a plastic blue tort. So, you know, I think that I'm proud of all the activists that are doing a lot of work out there, and staying strong as a community and supporting each other as a Puerto Rican community is what's gonna give us hope. I don't usually like to comment on the political status. A lot of people come to me like, Puerto Rico is not a state, Puerto Rico is this, Puerto Rico is that, and I kind of like, because of the privilege of me living here, I don't feel empowered enough to talk about the topic. Like I remember when I went to a Puerto Rican parade last year, even before the hurricane. This was in New York. Someone approached me and asked me about the same topic. And that day that we had the Puerto Rican parade in New York, it was the same day that the Puerto Ricans were gonna vote on their 5th plebiscite on deciding if the island was going to be independent country, is it going to be what it is as a commonwealth, if it was going to be statehood. And the woman, you know, I was wearing a tank top, I was wearing like a gold necklace, like I didn't look very, you know, I looked like really like I would not know what she was going to answer. And she was asking me like, what do you think about this topic? And I still use this as an example. I told her like, you know, I'm living in the United States. I don't feel like I have the power to control the island. We have voted many times, and we have chosen multiple things, and nothing has happened. We had just been getting exploited over and over with our status. And you know, I told her like, I believe in our democracy in Puerto Rico, and I believe like people are gonna get out and vote for what they want. And that occasion, statehood won. But nothing still happened in the island. And one of the primary things that I believe, when I went to my public administration class in UPR, University of Puerto Rico, I remember the professor started with one of the topics was politics, and he was like, you're here, but I want you to think that the island status depends mostly on our political parties. Like if the island becomes a statehood, the PNP will not exist because their mission is to get statehood. If the island still a Commonwealth, it's good for the Commonwealth party because they're always gonna support Commonwealth. And then there's the independent, which are having a revival, and now a lot of young people are advocating and joining the independent party, which is the party that's fighting for the liberation of Puerto Rico and turn Puerto Rico into its own country.
And it seems like, looking at it way from the outside, that the current Commonwealth status is almost the worst of both of either world. I mean, there isn't full statehood, so I don't remember where I read that like half of mainland U.S. citizens don't know that Puerto Ricans are citizens.
Yeah.
And
I still get asked questions like, do you guys have Burger Kings? Do you guys have, what dollars do you use? What money do you use? What currency do you use? Like, I still hear those questions. Do you have internet? They have slowed down since the hurricane. I think that's one of the things that, if I would say like what positive thing the hurricane brought, I thought it took off that mask that we had. And it's educating a lot of people. A lot of people are asking questions. In both parties, I have seen people from the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the Green Party talking about Puerto Rico and Puerto Rico's issues, and how from the mainland we can actually advocate for the help that the island deserve, and the support that the island deserve, and the funding that the islands deserve.
Now, this is a very technical question, but if you are a Puerto Rican U.S. citizen living on Puerto Rico, do you get to vote for president?
We don't, but we get to vote in the primaries. Isn't that interesting?
My sister-in-law lived on Guam for many decades, a couple of decades.
That's another Commonwealth.
It is.
Another colony.
And it's like, and she was born in Oregon, stateside, but while she lived on Guam, she was like a second-class citizen.
Yeah. And that's a reality. The same thing with the Virgin Islands. We get to vote for primaries, but we don't get to vote
Primaries, but not in the
yeah,
main
and we
election.
also have the la secretaria de Estado, which kind of like so we have a person that's speaking Congress, like a kind of a congresswoman. Right now, is a woman, but she gets to talk, but she doesn't get to vote. I don't,
Yeah.
that's the political position that we have. The only position that we have in Congress
Yeah.
is that we have someone that talks, but don't vote, don't have any power over anything. Like it's really, if you really say like a second
Yeah.
class citizens, we're gonna give you the perspective that you have someone and that you have power, but reality you don't.
Yeah. Well, even DC doesn't have statehood, so
Yeah, and
you're one
it-
step down from
Yeah.
the DC
And that's the capital.
status. And so you started talking. I partly wanted to make the point that with at least 20 students coming from Puerto Rico to New London. New London, right now we're in school budget time of year, and from what I hear, the proposed budget is more money but less services. And one thing I think people should realize is that we are one of the very few school systems in the region where our number of students is going up. And if 25 students from Puerto Rico come, that's we have 3,000 students from New London students total. That's actually, I won't say it's a huge number, but it's a 1% increase in students just through immigration.
Yeah.
So, we have to think about what our capacity is and, make sure we can do it.
Yeah. And if we are gonna do it, are we gonna do it well? Too. That's a question too. And how are we making ourselves accountable as a city, as a town, city? That we are providing good education to our kids. I think that we're accountable for that. And I think the whole community, the whole New London, is accountable for our educational system. And that's why it's so important. When I was in the campaign, when I was running for Board of Education, I was like, you need to get out and vote. Like this is your school. Like we were talking earlier. Like then you will have you have an opinion about an issue, but you didn't when you had the chance to take power over that issue,
Right.
you didn't do it.
Yeah. And we all really have to take power where we can, because there are a lot of areas where we don't have much power,
Yeah.
but sometimes we do. Now, another thing I wanted to talk to you about, partly because, former employment and volunteering both has been a lot with New London youth. And, recently, as a result of gun violence that we're seeing in schools, like really not just one incident, but it's been a lot of incidents, the youth are taking action.
Yes.
And what's your perspective on that?
Take action whenever they can. I will support them. If I was a student myself, I will have walked out in their thing. I think our youth, our younger generations are realizing that they also need a voice. And if their parents are not speaking for them, they are gonna do it by themselves. And I'm really proud of our youth, and at least in New London High School, knowing that people wanted one thing, but the student wanted the other, and the student actually went for what they wanted. I think that's powerful, and that's a teachable moment for our politicians in power. Actually, these kids are raising awareness about this issue that you're not. So I really support them. If this is the only issue that's affecting them, walk out. But if there's other issues that are affecting them as students, why not organize a walkout for it too?
Yeah, and do other things as well, because I know that Hearing Youth Voices about maybe 3 years ago was talking about attendance policy and credit loss, and they influence policy.
Yeah. So how does our youth can influence policy? Like our youth can do anything they want. I remember going to the Board of Education meetings, and one of the things that I've been telling them, it's because they were actually one of the, I think they were the only youth organization in New London that actually invited Board of Education candidates to a forum and asked them what they were gonna do for them in their schools. At the end of the day, for Board of Education, I think like their constituents are not the people that vote for them, and I said it during my campaign. I did the constituents for the Board of Education in town should be the students. And I told them when they were having the meetings about the walkout, I told them like you need to make them accountable. Like you need to be more board members accountable for what they say they will support you on. And the quotes are there. It was published. I don't know if you ever saw the guidelines for voting when they did the interviews and the key points that people supported.
They posted in their window.
Yeah. And if you see, like every candidate looked perfect. Like everybody was supporting restorative justice, and I kind of told them like you need to watch out. Are they doing what they say they will? So I think if they wanna walk out because they want restorative justice, they should definitely walk out. If they wanna walk out because they want more teachers of color teaching in our schools, they should definitely walk out. I will be there for them. I think walking out is not something that make them less of a students. I think they make them more powerful, and they make them leaders for our community. And they are the future. We always, even when I was in school, I was said that I was the future. And then when I run for Board of Education, I'm like, well, I'm here. I'm the future. I don't think that happened. So.
Well, it's ironic to me because of course, when I was a teenager in the 1960s. And during that time, there was almost a generational war going on. You really felt as though, during the Nixon administration, that older generation was really at war with my generation when we were young. And we did a lot of demonstrating, not me so much personally, but people in my generation. And it's so ironic to me now that we are the older generation, that we're almost perpetrating what we suffered from. And it saddens me really, because I my own kids are in their 40s, and I did not feel that kind of generational divide when they were teens and I was 20 years younger. But now I really feel that the millennials in particular, I mean, it seems like, yeah, I know. It's like they get blamed for everything. I know we talked before the show about how people are blaming millennials for like Toys R Us going bankrupt because they're not buying enough toys.
Because we're not having enough babies, quote unquote. Millennials are not having enough baby. Young women between the ages of 18 to 28 are not having babies.
So our economy is collapsing because of you. And of course, millennials aren't buying houses, but millennials have been more saddled with debt than I think any generation in the history of this country.
That's true. I mean, when I see my friends and they're paying their student loans. I was lucky enough to get scholarships in the University of Sacred Heart in Puerto Rico, but I know other colleagues that were not lucky enough to get scholarships, and they have $30,000 debt. I mean, compared to the mainland, I think that's one of the things that we have good. Like our graduate programs and subgraduate programs in Puerto Rico are relatable cheap. But like I have friends over here that's still paying hundreds of thousands of dollars because they wanted to be a teacher, or they wanted to be a librarian. I'm like, no, it's not cool. But at the same time, when you go see these colleges and campuses, I have as a millennial and a person that went to college in Puerto Rico, I get confused. I'm not sure if it's an educational environment or a country club kind of style, because a lot of competitiveness with a lot of colleges and universities is who has the best facilities to provide, like who has this movie theater, who has the best bar. I didn't know that in the mainland that happened. In Puerto Rico, we don't have bars in our colleges, but that's a thing here, and I didn't know.
It wasn't a thing when I was a kid. Actually,
really?
The drinking age was, it was 20. The drinking age was 21. The voting
it has
age
always
was
been
21.
here at 21.
No, it went down to 18 for a short time.
In Puerto Rico, it has always been 18. But so it will make, I would say like, it would make sense for us to have a bar. I mean, there was a bar like 2 streets below, but like over here, they're competing against like infrastructure and who has the best cinema, who has the best fitness center. And I'm like, what about the education and the educational quality that we're providing to our undergraduate students?
Yeah, even the state schools, I think, have kind of lost their way. That they're very expensive. And, I was pretty lucky with my kids that even with them going to college in the 1990s, they had a little bit of financial aid, but they didn't end up with huge amounts of debt. Each of them ended up with maybe less than $10,000 in debt, probably quite less than $5,000 in debt, because just the cost of college was so much less. But now, even if you go to UConn as an in-state student, you can graduate with $50,000 in debt. And how can you buy a house? How can you really even think about having babies or saving the economy?
Yeah, that's completely true. I mean, now that I'm 25 and I'm getting to understand what it really means to be an adult, like healthcare, for example, housing, and finding rents are going up really, really high. At least in New London, for one bedroom, the average now is like $950. When I started looking for apartments, I think the average on Zillow was $750 for a one bedroom, nothing included.
Yeah.
But now, the rents are skyrocketing everywhere, and related to homelessness, that's gonna increase the numbers of homelessness that we have in our street. And one of the things that's really interesting, that they're changing. A lot of organizations are changing the language from homeless to houseless, because there's a houses, but they're not for you. They're not available for you.
Well, yeah, we only have about 2 minutes left, but I wanted, when you brought up homelessness or houselessness, New London has a lot of empty buildings, and it just seems so frustrating that you have people who need places to live, and then you have empty spaces that really are sitting and not being utilized. And I don't know what the answer is. There is, as you know, an initiative in New London right now to try to get community land trusts going to help people buy houses that are more affordable and then free up apartments so that it isn't so competitive a field to be able to be a renter.
I think that would be amazing if that does happen in New London. But also, there's other stuff that we can do. We can do policy. We can open a Hartford. I think Hartford has one, which is like a housing. There is a housing committee, which is like if the rent is going up and you're not able to afford it, they will advocate for you, and they will talk to your landlord. But there's nothing like that in New London. I think if my rent goes up, I don't know where to go.
Well, good luck. Well, we're out of time. Thanks for coming on the show and talking about all kinds of stuff. And we'll have to do this again.
Yes, definitely.
So remember Alliance for Living when you're thinking about giving. And we'll see you next week. Maybe? Yeah.
I was hoping they were going to run the intro.